Good evening. My name is Andrea Campbell, and I'm the president of the Boston City Council. I'm also the vice chair of the City of Boston's Committee on Public Safety and Criminal Justice. I'm joined by my colleague, Councilor Flynn of District 1, who is co-hosting this conversation with me. District 2, thank you, Caroline. You can say you got that terribly wrong. This is a public hearing, so just some quick logistics. I want to remind folks that it's being recorded. It will be rebroadcast on Comcast 8, RCN 82, Verizon 1964, and online. We ask that you silence your cell phones and any other devices. We will take public testimony at various points during the hearing, and we will let you know when that is. But if you would like to give public testimony, it's extremely important that you sign one of these documents. And note that you can do it at the front check-in table. We also ask that when you sign in, you state your name, of course, your affiliation. Please write so that we can read it. Sometimes we have a challenge reading people's writings, and we have to skip over them. And then lastly, this is Docket 0879. It is an order for a hearing to discuss violence and sexual assault in the city of Boston. In addition to public testimony, we will have two panels. The first panel will be survivors, and the second will be providers, city officials, as well as state officials. I have to always start from a place of gratitude, so I of course want to thank Northeastern Law School for hosting us. I also want to give a special thank you to Margot, if you could raise your hand. Margot and her team here at the Northeastern Domestic Violence Institute and Center for Health Policy and Law have been tremendous partners in this work for a very long time. We wouldn't be in this space. This would not have gone so smoothly if it weren't for Margot and her team, especially doing the outreach to find courageous individuals to come forward and share their stories. So thank you, Margot, and your team for the work you do every day. In addition, they provide support and legal assistance to their clients. So if you don't know them and you care about this issue, you should get to know them. Councilor Flynn and I called for this hearing for a few reasons. Most importantly, incidents of domestic violence, sexual assault, and child abuse, which is often left out, are sadly quite common. Though often unreported, especially by immigrants, members of the LGBTQIA community, and those who may be hesitant to contact law enforcement. However, these issues affect everybody. There is no face to domestic violence, sexual assault, or child abuse. They can affect anyone regardless of demographic, socioeconomic status, or sexual orientation. This hearing is to build a foundation of understanding of the scope of the problem, and we see this as a first in a series of conversations. And we also see it as an opportunity for the providers who do the work on the ground every single day to share the work they are doing to address these issues. And personally, for Councilor Flynn and I, when we ran for office, we found ourselves, because we represent districts that have large immigrant populations, we found ourselves engaging with residents who would talk about these issues. And so this was an opportunity for us to come together and partner on the work, and specifically to raise not only awareness, but to ask the question, how can the city and what can the city do more to address these issues? How can we make it easier for victims to report, survivors to report these incidents safely? How can we increase and expand access to services? These are just some of the questions we look to review today. We will hear directly from survivors, organizations that serve and provide support to survivors. We will hear from city and state officials, and we welcome anyone to join us to testify to the extent you feel comfortable. And if you do not, there are numerous ways that you can still let us know what is on your heart, what is in your mind. Feel free to write a note, send an email, or check in with team members. If I could have some of the folks from the Council Central staff and my team and Councilor Flynn's team just raise your hands. These folks are available to you to also be able to share what might be on your heart that you may not want to share publicly. Lastly, this is a huge topic to undertake, of course, in one hearing, which is why we plan this to be the first in a series of conversations. But we did feel it was important to hold this first one in October in recognition of National Domestic Violence Awareness Month. I'll close by saying that I am deeply grateful and I told myself not to get emotional, but I am deeply grateful. I'm also pregnant, so if I get emotional throughout this, it's also because of that. To the 3 women that are sitting to my right for their courage and strength to come forward. They didn't have to do it, and they have agreed to do it. So we will do more listening today than we do talking. I often think that politicians do maybe too much of this. So we will do a lot of listening today, but really appreciate you being here. And I will turn it over to Councilor Flynn for opening remarks before turning it over to the survivors to share pieces of their story and to ask questions that they can address to share with the group. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Council President Andrea Campbell, for working with me for sponsoring this important hearing, as well as Councilor McCarthy for chairing this committee as well. Also, I want to say a special thank you to Margot and her team at Northeastern University Law School in helping coordinate with us for this hearing. We did a lot of listening over the last 4 or 5 months to survivors and to service providers, but we learned a lot from Margot and her team, so we want to say thank you for Margot for her excellent work, not only in helping us, but more importantly on your commitment to helping the survivors of domestic violence. I also want to thank the panelists that are here today for participating in this important hearing. I want to commend the courage of our panel of survivors for being here, as Council President Campbell has mentioned. We had an opportunity to say hello prior to this start of the hearing, and your stories are powerful, and we thank you for sharing them with us today. Again, I want to say thank you to our service providers. Your work is incredibly important, so thank you for being here. Over the weekend, I had an opportunity to attend a gala for the Asian Task Force Against Domestic Violence, and also heard powerful stories of survivors in the Asian community. I represent a large Asian community. I represent a large immigrant community, and many of them are undocumented. I believe that domestic violence and sexual assaults are issues that are prevalent, but are often not talked about. As the Council President said, we're here to listen and to learn from our panelists to see how we can better educate the public on this issue, support our survivors and victims, as well as discuss ways that we can prevent domestic violence and sexual assaults. I also represent a large LGBTQ community in my district, and I know that there are often barriers for these communities, including our immigrant community, in not reporting domestic violence and sexual assaults. So I want to learn more also from this hearing about how we can support these communities as well. And finally, I'd like to continue the work of my mother, Kathy Flynn, who was the First Lady, who did a lot of work when she was younger on domestic violence issues. I hope I can continue working on this issue, continue working closely with Andrea Campbell and the City Council and the Mayor's Office, the Boston Police, District Attorneys, but especially the survivors of domestic violence, for your courage in coming forward, but learning from your stories and how we can hopefully prevent this, but get services for people that desperately need them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councilor Flynn. And at this time, we will start with panel number 1. And I think I will start with Shakira, who I know has prepared a little bit of sort of an opening remarks, and then we'll go into some questions, and we'll go with the flow of things. But I can also, yeah. And please state your name for the record.
Absolutely. My name is Shakira Robinson. I am also known as Shakira Story. I am a single mother of 3. I am currently enrolled in law school pursuing a bachelor's degree in criminal justice with a focus on management and leadership in reference to my force of advocacy for myself and for other survivors. I have also started 2 nonprofit organizations that speak directly to victims and survivors of sexual assault and domestic violence. I am also in the process of writing a book in reference to my story, and I am so grateful to be here today.
Yeah, I'll just take this. If you, to the extent you feel comfortable, at least, you can state your name for the record, partial, full name, whatever you want to say, and if any opening remarks you have, and if not, we can move along, and then I can turn it over to questions.
My name is Natalie Mara. I am 21 years old. I go to Northeastern. I am a fourth year.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Emmanuel Alubin, and I'm here today. I wanna say thank you to Margot and also to all the panel here to listen my story today. It's not really comfortable for me, but I hope I'm gonna have strength enough to share it with you. Thank you.
And I'll just say, as we continue this process, I'm an energy person, right? We have a large crowd here of people that could, whether it is doing this, clapping, or whatever it is that encourages folks to share, to feel good, to pull strength up here. Audience, do it. We'll ask some questions, but silence can also be a little difficult, I think, to navigate. So to the extent people want to offer up a clap or something, yes. Thank you. We're all human, and I think that helps. So what I'll do is, I'll ask questions, and to the extent you guys feel comfortable, just chime in. If the question is too uncomfortable, feel free to not answer, and I'll just move on to some other questions. One of the questions that we talked about, and we discussed these beforehand, is what is something you wish people knew about being in an abusive relationship? And take your time.
One of the things I wish people knew, both the folks who are in it, the folks who are observing, the folks who are bystanders, I wish you knew what it takes to even say, I need help. There's a whole lot that comes with that. The level of embarrassment is extreme. And it takes away from the ability to be ourselves. So having to come out initially and say, I need help as an adult can be mind-blowing to people who either don't understand the circumstance because they've never experienced, or for people who are ignorant to the fact that this is an issue that happens every day. Also to those who think that we stay just because. I think it's very important to know that.
It's so true because I was staying in my marriage just because I have a baby, and I didn't want to struggle with my life with a baby. And I thought the man that I married to, he really want to have someone in his life and really want to have a family. That's why I was staying in my marriage for my son, because I didn't see my life before, but I saw my son. But after what I discovered, and I said, enough is enough, I have to leave. I just take my son and my mom and just flee, because he's very, very scared. When you are seeking for help, and you cannot find anywhere, you cannot find help. And once the person that you are married to say nobody gonna trust you, nobody gonna believe you, cause he point the thing on your forehead. So that's the way I saw it. He said, cause I'm an immigrant, I'm undocumented person, nobody gonna trust me because he is a US citizen. So I have to be careful because one day you can wait, somebody gonna come and beat me up. And nobody will mess up in his family. They all go 6 feet on the ground. So I was scared. I didn't want to be killed. And I was scared for my son's life. I was scared for my family, my mom and myself and my son. And on May 24th, when I left my house, I said, enough is enough. I have to stand on my feet. I have to take my power like a woman. I have to say enough is enough. And that's the way it is. I'm sorry, because I'm Asian. We are women, Asian women. We raise our kids without men. And I have to go back to my roots. I say enough is enough. I know I'm in USA. I'm in Massachusetts state, where they said it's a woman's state, and I keep looking for help. I didn't find any help. I said enough is enough. I have to move on, no matter what. You can come to try to kill me or try to do something bad to my son, but enough is enough. I left my house. And that's why I'm here today. So all over the world, people has to know when you are an immigrant, when you are married to someone, there's so many abuse in the house or in the couple. But we don't want to say nothing because we're scared to be in jail, because that's the way it is. The person who has the paper, they say nobody gonna trust you. They're gonna deport you. You have to be careful. That's why I say, because I was scared. I don't want to be separate from my son. I don't want to be separate from my. No, I'm sorry.
As it relates to survivors of domestic violence that are immigrants, and many that may be undocumented as well, there's even additional barriers to leaving an abusive relationship. I know there's some great providers that are doing excellent work in helping our immigrant neighbors. But what are some of the other barriers that are facing victims from the immigrant community that maybe we can learn about?
There's a huge misconception. There's a huge misconception that if you say something, something's going to be done. There's a huge misconception that you call the police, you're going to go to court, and it's over. No one ever tells you that this is a long game. No one ever tells you this. The narrative of this is hurry up and wait. No one ever tells you that you have to be the force and facilitator of your case. No one ever tells you that the police officers who take these reports aren't going to be as detailed as your story. So when it's conveyed in the court system, it doesn't add up. And so now when you go before a judge and there's a defense side and there's the victim side, there's this back and forth which creates the long haul because something's not adding up.
One question, when Counselor Flynn and we met with a host of survivors and providers, I should say, here, and we talked a lot about justice. So I'd be curious from you guys' perspective, what does justice mean to you? What does it look like? What does it feel like? Anything you want to say to that would be extremely helpful to us too.
Justice is accountability. And hopefully rehabilitation. It's when someone acknowledges that they've done something wrong, and they're willing to do anything they can to fix that part of themselves.
If I can add what justice looks like, being someone who has been in and out of 3 separate court systems in a 2-year-old domestic violence case, justice looks like a collaborative voice of services and support and community and elected officials and government and changes in policy. Justice looks like survivors being a part of the facilitating of the laws and rights that are supposed to be for us that are against us. Justice looks like the ability to face your abusers with an understanding that you're not doing this by yourself. Justice looks like not having to rehash and regurgitate our stories for non-factors. Justice looks like people who are resemblant of our stories and people who are allies to our stories supporting us in this fight against domestic violence. That's what I think it looks like.
Justice for me means transparency. Justice for me means equity. Justice for me means a path where you can be happy, when you can find support, like you said. Because in my country, I'm from a country where there is no justice, and I've been seeing women being killed by their spouses, by their boyfriend, and when I came in USA, I thought that could be different, but in my case, what I'm facing right now, I said that there is not too much differences. So for me, justice is really transparency. That's how I see justice.
What role or would you have been able to seek safety without support, or what role did family or neighbors or community play in helping you get the services or programs that you needed?
My loved ones played a huge role. My best friend, who's here today, and without her help, I don't think I could have done it. She valued my life more than I valued it at one point, and took a lot of strength, and I'm very thankful.
I want to say thank you to Shakira for her support, because without her, it's been a long time I will give up. And recently I shared something with her, and she said she's not gonna be by my side. I have to take this thing back, because many times I was thinking if I didn't have my son, it's been a long time I would go back to my country, because I don't want with someone that you get married and put you in that big trouble in America, lied on your back, say many bad things to you. I didn't come in US for that thing, and we really need support. Thank you so much for anything we're gonna bring up from that meeting, because I know from now on I'm gonna be more than ever like surrounded by you. Thank you so much. That's what I can say.
For me, as a single mom of 3, and my son asking me if I had enough of getting beat up, when he picked me up off the floor from being passed out. That's what support looked like for me, because that was an understanding that what he was seeing was not what he was used to, and I didn't want that to be the end of our story. And that was the start of me taking back my life. Over the last 2 years, support for me has been my family, my children, my attorney, the community of people who I call my circle of excellence, who, like Emanuela said, would not accept me giving up, would not accept me stopping this fight, would not accept me being tired of the long haul, of the back and forth, of their inconsistent reports being reported that were not being supported. Support looked like to me my inbox of repeat women saying to me, we need you to keep fighting. Support looks like to me every last one of you in this room, because I don't think you came here by accident. I don't think you came here just to hear us rehash our stories, to go back to your lives tomorrow as if this never happened. I believe that after today, you will be a part of this call of action. I believe that after today, you will hear our voices every single time you hear domestic violence. And my hope is that you will now be a part of this movement so that we can minimize what happens to women like us, to the LGBTQ community, to the immigrant community, to the marginalized women, to the children who are not able to report it. That's what support looks like to me.
I'm just asking them if they want to add anything. This is not an interrogation, so we don't want to keep asking too many questions, but at this point, I'll let them add anything if they so choose, before we move on to public testimony and then panel number 2. You sure? 'Cause that wasn't, you sure?
Is there anything else you want to say?
I just, on behalf of Councilor Flynn and I, want to thank them, because it, like we said, requires tremendous courage to come up here and share your story, to be vulnerable in front of many strangers in the room. We had others who wanted, frankly, to be here, to represent other communities, and we were talking about LGBTQ communities, obviously children who cannot be here to talk about their experiences. And so there are many folks who are not a part of this conversation, but who wanted to be here, but it was just too challenging and too difficult, so they could not. So that being said, I really want everyone in this room to give these women a huge round of applause, to thank them for their service. So before we go to panel 2, I'm just going to allow a couple of folks who've signed in to do some public testimony. Find my pen here. First we have, looks like, can I read this? Dawn, oh.
Oh, yeah, Dawn Sama. She's from the Asian Task
Oh,
Force.
the Asian Task Force, Dawn Sama.
Yep.
Thank you. And after Dawn comes up to provide some testimony, during public testimony, we don't ask questions of folks. We allow them to come and to share. And then we go right on to the next person. So we give folks about 3 minutes or so to share. And so after Dawn, I would like to then invite up Gianna Tillman? Janina Tillman. I'll call you in a minute, hon. Okay. If you could state your name for the record and your organization.
Dawn Sama, Asian Task Force Against Domestic Violence. Thank you to the survivors for your courage and your story. That's tough to follow. So I want to thank President Counselor Campbell and Counselor Flynn. Ooh, give me a rest.
Breathe,
Again.
it's okay, we're in no rush. Yep.
Thank you. Do you guys want some water? Thank you again for the opportunity to testify on such an important topic. My name is Dawn Sama. I'm the co-executive director of the Asian Task Force Against Domestic Violence. We are a statewide nonprofit organization that's been serving Asian victims of violence in Massachusetts for over 26 years. Over 70% of ATAS clients are referred by mainstream providers whom lack the linguistic and cultural capacity to provide comprehensive services to limited English proficient, immigrant, documented and undocumented refugees who are Asian victims. ATAS bridges access to services with staff that are fluent in over 20 different Asian languages and dialects and have extensive lived experience. The hearing's intention is to open dialogue on opportunities to reduce incidents of domestic violence and make it easier to report these incidents and support survivors. Currently, there is a simple and widely accepted healthcare screening practice, which is one gateway to all three of those goals. That screening question is, do you feel safe at home? Which is essentially code for being, are you being physically abused? And for a person raised in the United States accustomed to Western practices, this question is intended meaning is generally understood. The problem is that in our diverse city of Boston, homes to immigrants and refugees that speak over 75 different languages, in which are 47% Asian languages, that simple question could be misunderstood to mean something completely different. ATAS clients who represent LEP Asian immigrant and refugees in general interpreted this question to mean, is my roof leaking? Thus, my house is structurally unsound. Is my neighborhood unsafe because robberies are going on and it's violence, and there's violence in the area? A stranger's been stalking me and I feel scared when I leave the house. See, DV may be on the books as a criminal act in other communities, but it's often not enforced. The question, do you feel safe at home, is understood to ask whether or not the environment outside their home is safe, not inside their private homes. This is just one example of where we have good intentions, but they aren't culturally informed and therefore ineffective, particularly with our higher risk populations. A significant barrier to service is knowing who isn't being reached and why. I'd like to offer 2 recommendations that could help us address these issues. The first is thinking about how we collect and analyze data. Disaggregated data is critical to understanding the diverse ethnic populations in Boston and delivering effective services. Also, the interpretation of data is as important. We know that underreporting is common in DV and SA, it's particularly sexual assault, particularly in cases in immigrant and LEP populations. However, low numbers should be a red flag, not an indicator of less need. The second is building collaborations with culturally specific CBOs. These CBOs have extensive untapped knowledge in serving marginalized populations and sub-marginalized population that's critical in building and evaluating responsive policy, research, and best practice. I'd like to give an example of just one of those practices, and that's ADAPT, and that stands for Addressing Disparities in Asian Populations Through Translational Research, and this is an example of this type of collaborative. It was established in 2011 in Tufts CTSI program, and ADAPT is a community collaborative, academic community collaboration between Tufts Medical, Tufts University, and 6 Boston-based Asian-serving CBOs, of which ATASC is one of. Currently, ADAPT is working with Boston Public Health Commission on Chinatown-specific data that shows higher risks of diabetes. Other research collaboration centers on health disparities, housing, and problem gambling, which has been linked to DV, prostitution, and trafficking. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. And while we have our next person coming up, it's quite, we were just, I think, nudging each other. We were just talking about the importance of disaggregating data and why at a health disparities hearing at City Hall a couple of days ago, and specifically these examples were used by one of the panelists. So thank you, Don, for being here. Hello.
Hello.
If you could state your name for the record if you feel comfortable, and anything else you want to share, and you can jump right in.
Hello, my name is Janina Tillman, and I am currently, My name is Janina Tillman, and I'm currently a client at Casa Myrna. I've been involved with a situation for a couple of months. It took me about 6 months to get connected with an advocate that could help me start to navigate through my situation. And for me, my situation is considered low risk because there is no real physical abuse. This is a problem because when someone can manipulate you to spend your money on inappropriate things, or if someone could manipulate your children to turn against you, or someone could use your mental health against you to cause you not to want to be productive or want to be active, that's just as harmful and just as detrimental as someone smacking you, and sometimes even worse, because words stick in your head, words repeat themselves, words come back at times when you didn't think they were there anymore. Words don't change. They engrave on your soul like stone. So words are just as harmful as a hand or a fist, or sometimes even worse. I need you to bring attention to the fact that domestic violence does not just happen between a boyfriend and a girlfriend. It can happen between a daughter and a mother. It can happen between a grandmother and grandchildren. It can happen between friends. It can happen in many different situations. So we must change our regulations to see through a prism's eye. We must change our regulations to support the little guy such as myself. I don't feel safe going and asking public officials for help because I don't have your fancy clothes. I don't have your fancy talk. I don't even have the pride you have as you walk through the walls because I'm not allowed to have that in my own walls. So how can I come and ask you or tell you what's going on in my personal life when I don't feel you even view me as a human being? I am of the less percent. I'm considered under poverty because I collect DTA assistance and get benefits. But due to the fact that I can't get consistent mental health care to stay stable, I cannot hold down a job. Because some days I cry. I cry for weeks. I cry for hours. I cry for days, months. I cried for 5 years of my life every day. Nobody asked me if I was okay. I grocery shopped. I took my kids to school. I went to their parent council meetings. I held down my part-time job that was overnight, and I was able to go in a corner at night and cry and unpack boxes. Nobody asked me if I was okay. I'm the invisible color. But today I stand up and I say, do better. We deserve better. I am valuable. If I was given consistent mental health care, I would probably be a CEO of one of your companies. I'd probably be running my own company. But because the tears in my eyes blind my path moving forward, no one's there with tissue for me. I don't speak any other language, and I don't come from anywhere else but here. I was born and raised in Boston, and I don't exist in Boston. Thank you.
No, thank you. So now I'm going, thank you. thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you for sharing, thank you for signing in, and thank you for committing to come up and actually coming up and sharing your story. I really appreciate it. We appreciate it. We see you. Thank you. I will be sort of allowing public testimony throughout, but now I want to go to some of the panelists and providers from the second panel. And because of our setup, we'd love to have everyone all at once. That's just clearly not going to happen. So I'm going to call a few folks at a time, and then we will then speak to those few, and then go to another set, and then go to public testimony in between. And so first, I'd like to call up Margot to join us. Let's see here. I have my list. Our Suffolk County District Attorney, Rachel Rollins. Oh, okay. And I'll call up Deborah from the Brookview House. So I'll try to incorporate, I know we have BPD here, thank you, we have the Health Commission, community-based providers. I'll try to do it so that we actually have a slice of those who are state officials, city officials with a community-based provider to hopefully bring some richness to the conversation. And just for the sake of time, you know, I also want to respect people's time. We will not be here all night. We could be here all night, but we will not be here all night. This space is not ours. But before we proceed, we did ask folks who are going to testify on panel number 2, like panel number 1, to come prepared with some opening remarks in response to some questions we gave them. So we will have them start with that, and then Councilor Flynn and I have a few questions, not many, frankly, because our goal is, again, to do more listening. So we appreciate you guys being here. I'll start with you, Margot, then go to the district attorney, and then go to Deborah. And I want to thank the district attorney for being here. She could have sent a whole crew or unit, I guess. She came directly from Logan Airport, having been out of town for a few days because of the magnitude of what we're going to be talking about, and wanted to personally be here to be a part of this conversation, understanding, of course, the magnitude and the role that her office plays as well. So I appreciate you being here, and thank you. And thank you to Deborah as well for the work you do, and thank you, Margot.
And thank you again to panel 1 and all of the people giving public testimony. This couldn't be done without you. So I also want to thank everyone here. It is really important that we're all here and we're all listening. My name is Margot Lindauer, and I currently am the director of the Domestic Violence Institute here at Northeastern University School of Law. In my capacity as director here, I oversee and run 2 programs. One's a first-year volunteer program for first-year law students, where we seek to meet survivors at places where they first turn to for help, including but not limited to local community health centers, including Upham's Corner, Codman Square, Mattapan Health Center, the Dorchester House, Boston Medical Center, and Boston Children's Hospital, to name a few. That is not an exhaustive list, but it's just an example. I also run the Domestic Violence Clinic, which is an upper-level legal clinic based out of the Boston Municipal Court, primarily in Dorchester, but we've expanded our scope to Roxbury, West Roxbury, Charlestown, Brighton, and East Boston in the past year. We focus on intimate partner violence, and the specific legal work we do focuses around 209A and 258E civil restraining orders. However, as it's become abundantly clear through the testimony that you've already heard, domestic violence does not happen in a silo. One specific legal solution does not solve a problem. My work exclusively focuses on survivors. After doing and teaching this work for many years, I've come to realize that what I know is far less than what I don't know. Barriers to reporting are tremendous. On a practical and objective level, both in the meta and micro sense, we have systemic racism and poverty always at play. It is nearly impossible for most survivors I work with to leave their relationship. On a practical level, there's nowhere to go. We have far more need than there are domestic violence shelter beds. Many, if not all, of the survivors I work with are entangled with their abusers. Entanglement can happen in many different ways, but family and economic entanglement are just a few. It's not a fair framework to ask, why did you not leave? On a broader level, we just don't know enough. We need to develop systems to measure outcomes. As you heard before, what is justice? We don't actually know what justice is because we don't survey survivors. How do individual survivors define what they've experienced and what they need from a systemic level, from a practical level, and from an outcome-based level? We don't have the data. The current civil and criminal justice systems infrequently accomplish what our survivors want, but we don't know what would. Something about the work that I do that would surprise those who are not engrossed in on a daily basis, but a lot of people I see here are partners in the work, so it's not going to surprise them, is the frequency, severity, longevity, and low sentencing that accompanies many of the cases. This includes domestic violence, it includes sexual assault, it includes child abuse, and it includes an area that many people don't want to talk about, but is also elder abuse. Abuse against persons, intimate, children, elders, and others happens at a frequency that we are not willing to acknowledge. Perhaps we are at a precipice of some form with the Me Too movement, Harvey Weinstein, Matt Lauer, but not really. That has shocked the conscience of a very, very small sector of the population, and that sector is very privileged. That does not touch on the brutality that many people in this city, in this community, face on a day-to-day basis in their own homes. For the cases that are for the cases that are reported, the cases languish in our system. Our system is not equipped to move at the speed for which survivors need. We need more lawyers. And we need more lawyers who can do this work at no or little cost. We need organizations that can meet survivors where they are and provide long-term services, not services for discrete legal issues. The legal needs that emanate from violent episodes are vast: housing, immigration, child custody, child support, food insecurity, transportation, small claims, bankruptcy. The list goes on and on. We need more people whose organizations support the legal work that is needed. Thank you.
I'm Rachel Rollins. I'm the newly elected District Attorney of Suffolk County for 10 months. I've been in this position. We specifically interact with survivors in that we are where survivors can come to when charges are brought against the individuals that are harming them, and we prosecute those cases. What I will say, I think some barriers is I completely agree with Margot. I think the system works too slowly. I think we don't indict certain cases up out of district court into superior court. If we truly value people, I don't think we are doing that enough. I believe that we need to make sure we're speaking to victims more. That's one of the things I think we, as a system, not necessarily my office, but just the American legal system in and of itself, believes that we know what victims want and need, and oftentimes we aren't reflective of the very people that we are supposed to be assisting, right? And then we also need to make sure we are constantly self-correcting with respect to language, with respect to talking about the invisibility that people spoke of. Black, trans women, there are entire swaths of people that are invisible, or our behavior makes them feel as though they are, and we certainly know they exist. Something that happened this morning was a press conference we had regarding an involuntary manslaughter charge we brought against a person who we believe was, terrorizing her partner. what I spoke about this morning, and I think my role as the DA, you know, the people in this room understand this. We all need to be speaking to people outside of this room about the right language that they need to be using. So one of the things I was proud to say when everyone was listening about this case that, you know, 2 BC students were in love and then one of them committed suicide, and we believe that the girlfriend actually, we would argue, terrorized her boyfriend and preyed upon him, ultimately resulting in his death. But we said that domestic violence doesn't manifest in one particular way. To your point, ma'am, it's forced isolation from friends and family. It's physical assault, it's stalking, economic coercion, emotional threats, sexual assault, psychological intimidation. Domestic violence is not perpetrated by one type of abuser. A perpetrator is not limited by their gender or the gender of their partner, and it doesn't always look the same, but it is always about power and control. And so I feel as though, as the DA, we have an obligation as this office to not just prosecute, to let people know that we can provide services. You don't need to be fearful that we're going to force you, depending on what the circumstances are, and these are complicated cases, right? To your point, there are times where you love someone very much and just want the behavior to stop. You don't want them deported back to a place they haven't been in 30 years. You just want them to stop abusing you. So we have to be able to adapt appropriately to things like that. I'm proud that we hired a head of our victim witness advocate unit who's a licensed clinical social worker. So to push back on my staff who wants more lawyers. Lawyers are great, but we need more clinicians. We need more social workers. We need more people who understand and have lived experiences, and we're not doing nearly well enough. I'm proud that we've started the process. We have a lot of a way to go. So I will end with that and turn it over, but we can answer questions.
Thank you. I'm Deb Collins-Gooseby, the Chief Operating Officer at Brookview House. Brookview House, we have locations in Dorchester and Roxbury. We offer an emergency shelter program, and also we develop affordable housing in the community. I agree also with what Margot and District Rachel. And you notice we have the same polish, so we're bonding over the polish here. I agree with.
Oh my God, it really
It is really the same. Sorry.
It's exact.
And I also, what I wanted to, in addition to, was to talk about, my role is to make the connection also, is that Brookview, we deal primarily with homeless women, and to make the connection between homelessness and domestic violence. Oftentimes, survivors will enter through whatever system they can enter. And so what we found out at Brookview is that almost 90% of the women that come through our emergency shelter program are homeless as a result of domestic violence. Also to make the connection in terms of children, and it was glad to hear that we were talking about children, because oftentimes they're the unseen victims in all of this. And so that's great that we're hearing that. What I would say some of the barriers are, which we all know, is the lack of affordable housing, but more importantly, the lack of low-income housing, because affordable has become relative. The lack of culturally and linguistically appropriate clinical services, the lack of affordable childcare is also another barrier. What I think I still find interesting and surprising is that survivors are still not believed. Survivors are still having their stories told by others and not necessarily by them being told themselves. And until we begin to address the issues of domestic violence, we will continue to have issues with violence in schools and violence in the community, because those two things are linked and are bred and rooted in domestic violence and the violence that happens in the home. And I also would like to say that I'm very grateful, and my heart is just full hearing from the survivors that were here tonight. I was trying really hard to be appropriate and not cry, but to know that you are believed and that you are absolutely right, D.A. Rollins, that we have to begin to take this outside of here. This is like we're preaching to the choir, and we need to now move it outside and begin to really address the issues of domestic violence and sexual assault in our communities. At Brookview House, we work primarily with Black women, and so there's a whole nother marginalized community that we know that from research that Black women survivors aren't necessarily responding to the way traditional services are being offered, and that we have to be out of the box and thinking in our thinking and how we approach working with particularly Black and brown women who are impacted, because we are impacted totally different. Again, one of the things is that what we found is that as Black women, we don't necessarily want just to heal ourselves. We want to heal our whole entire family, and so programs have to be open to working with or making referrals to abusers. And I know that's a scary thing, but we have to begin to look at how we work with entire families. We also have to begin to break the cycle for children. Brookview takes a 2-generational approach that we believe, with all that we believe, is that if we can, children will stop the cycle of poverty and homelessness and domestic violence in their families if we're working with them just as hard as we're working with the parents in that family. I think that's it.
And I will just, to add one more thing, one of the fights that I have in the courthouses, so in Suffolk Superior Court, homicides trump all the other trials. I don't want us to have a domestic violence homicide in order for us to believe or listen to you or value you at that point. We need to, and I like to remind people with sexual assaults, domestic violence, these are almost murders where the person is still there. You are taking and robbing people of who they are, and that shell of that person, we want to get you back or make you survive this, but there should be no hierarchy of, oh, well, they're dead now, let's at least get that trial out of the door. Whether I have to fight my fingers to the bone to get Chief Justice Gantz and others to recognize we either need more sessions, we need to talk, and I did not recognize Ian Pollenbaum, who runs this unit in my office, and these are conversations we have every day. He's in the throes of a domestic violence murder trial right now out of Revere.
And he's right here in the front.
Ian is right here in the front, so what I can tell you is I don't want to wait for that to happen. I want to try to get services prior to this happening, and we are willing to listen and learn.
Thank you.
Can I say one more thing,
Of course,
too?
yeah.
One thing also that I'd like just to kind of say, and I think people in the audience know, but hurt people. And there's no perfect victim, as there's no perfect perpetrator. And so I think kind of expanding the conversation about what a victim, what a survivor, what a perpetrator looks like, and how we can appropriately serve them is going to go a long way.
Thank you. Do you have any questions? I may not even ask any questions.
Do you want to
Yeah, so because you guys covered so much within your testimony, we're going to proceed to the next. We're not forcing questions up here. But thank you guys. Continue to learn quite a bit, frankly. And we want to make sure we create space for others who have come forward. And Ian, thank you for being here as well and for the work that you do every single day. At this time, we're going to have representatives from the police department come up. That would be Sharon. And Terry Thomas, you can come up. Sharon, do you want anyone else to come up, or just the two of you guys? That's good? Okay, perfect. And then to have a community base, let's see, is Beth here? Oh, yes, duh, I'm looking at you. And I know Stephanie and Lauren, I'm going to be getting to you guys in the next time with the Health Commission, so thank you guys as well. And I would just ask, similar to the previous panelists, I would ask that you guys state your name for the record, your organization, and you can jump right in. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Sharon Dott, and I'm the Deputy Superintendent with the Boston Police Department. I am the commander of the Family Justice Center, and that houses the detectives that investigate human trafficking, crimes against children, domestic violence, and sexual assault. And next to me, I'll let him introduce himself, because this is Captain Thomas, who works at the FJC.
Good evening, Terry Thomas. I'm the captain detective over at the Family Justice Center, and I oversee those investigations from those units.
Good evening. I'm Beth Bouchard, and I'm the Associate Director of the Children's Advocacy Center of Suffolk County, also co-located in the Family Justice Center.
So I just want to thank the survivors for their story, for your courage and strength. Every time I hear a survivor's story, I always think to myself, what can we do better, what can we do more, and what we can do to improve the services that the police provide, along with the providers that we work with. So the detectives at the FJC, they investigate the cases, and they connect survivors to services and resources. We have domestic violence advocates, and they make referrals, they explain procedure, and they provide safety plans to our survivors. The multiple units that we have, they customize the referrals depending on what we need, whether it's the crimes against children, who deal a lot with the Child Advocacy Center. We have domestic violence, who deal with Casa Marina, so we deal with a lot of service providers at the FJC. And the one thing that's great about the FJC is that it houses so many providers that we work with. And that's a great partnership. Everything that we need are kind of housed in one place, for domestic violence, for the sexual assaults, for the crimes against children, for the human trafficking. So we work with a lot of great partners that provide services. I don't want to say barriers, but the challenges that we face are, we need more mental health, behavioral services, we need more housing, we need more abuse treatment services, underreporting by the LGBTQIA, underreporting by immigrants, refugees, the cultural differences that we deal with on a day-to-day basis, language barriers, and obviously trust within the police department and the services that we can provide to survivors.
Thank you.
I'll just add a few things. We have roughly 14,000 domestic violence calls per year. That's not even including the services on restraining orders. So we're very, very busy, but I'd like to reiterate just how lucky we are to have, it's almost a one-stop shop at the Family Justice Center with having all the service providers in there and building the relationships that we have with them. I haven't been there very long, but since I've been here, it's been an excellent experience. I think I made a lot of good connections and really value and know where to go to now with the services that we need. As the deputy had said, we have to customize with the different victims that we come across. We have to customize those and to be able to have those relationships and have the faith in those folks that we refer them to, that it's very important to us.
And I would say, first, that I'm so grateful for the invitation to participate on the panel, and appreciative to be among our tremendous partners at the FJC, the Boston Police Department, the Suffolk DA's office, the Family Justice Center, and the Boston Public Health Commission. Tonight, we've witnessed some very powerful testimony about violence, and I'm really grateful to have been here to get to hear that. And I think from where I sit with the CAC, the Children's Advocacy Center, it strikes me that child abuse is particularly difficult to talk about. 9 out of 10 children don't report abuse when it occurs, and nearly 2 out of 3 never report their abuse, because it can be so hard for anyone, let alone a child, to step forward, and because it's not always possible for kids to speak at events like this for themselves. I hope that we can elevate their voices tonight. I'm guessing many people in the room may not have heard yet about the CAC, but I'm really grateful to get to be here with you. It's important for the community to know that we exist, particularly because we respond to nearly 2,000 referrals for child abuse and commercial sexual exploitation every year. Since 1995, the CAC and our partners have been the city's frontline responders to child abuse. We coordinate multidisciplinary interventions for children and families, and we streamline their access to services, safety, and justice. While we serve Suffolk County, 85% of our referrals over the last year have pertained to Boston, primarily Dorchester, Roxbury, Mattapan, and East Boston. And the largest percentage of youth referred to the CAC are young girls ages 13 to 18, reporting sexual abuse. Before the CAC existed, if a child bravely came forward to disclose their abuse to a teacher, Maybe they would be brought to a school nurse, maybe to an ambulance, maybe to a hospital, maybe then later to a police station, and asked to tell their story over and over, potentially dozens of times, experiencing re-traumatization and stress along the way. Now youth and their families have access to the CAC and its network of providers, partners, and support. But many partners and many families in our community don't know that we exist and don't know that that help is available. We offer advocacy, crisis services in English and Spanish, transportation, and specialized medical care. We also offer short-term evidence-based clinical supports for kids and their families. Team is really the heart of who we are, and we include families and their children as part of our team. What we and our partners can do together is far greater than one agency can do alone. As far as barriers, we see that families encountering abuse are asked to overcome a lot. Fears about what's going to happen next, wait lists for specialized trauma services, and trying to seek and find trust amidst very complex systems. Research and our experience shows us that families fare much better when they receive comprehensive services in a timely way. We're here to help provide support, to reduce stigma, and to help families access healing. We're here to respond to every child that needs us, but we often feel like we're bursting at the seams. We're here to respond to every child that needs us, but many people in the community don't know that we're here. So thank you so much for shining a light on this issue and for having us be a part of this conversation.
I just want to say that the survivors spoke about having to retell their story over and over again. But I think the one thing that we do really well at the FJC is forensic interview of children. We just do one interview with all the partners together, so that child does not have to be re-interviewed by every single agency. So I think for the one thing that we love and that we do on behalf of children is that we have that one interview with all the providers, with the police, the DA's office, the CAC, and all the partners. So I think that's something unique, and hopefully that's something we can expound upon for domestic violence survivors.
Thank you. Do you have a question?
In my district in Chinatown, I know one of the most underreported ethnic communities in the city on child abuse and probably domestic violence as well, whether it's a mistrust of government in general or poverty, but especially immigration status and language access is always an issue before us. Having factored all those issues I mentioned, what can we do for our immigrant community, especially our immigrant community that may not speak English? How can we do a better job of getting services for them?
I think the deputy touched on it earlier. I think just trust within the community, and I think that's one of our fortes with the Boston Police is definitely the relationships that we built with the community policing. So I think that's very important. Also, we have access to, we may not provide those services, but we do have access to all these services. And between our community service offices and the FJC, then we can connect people and encourage survivors to get that help. And so I think that's very important to get that out there.
And Counselor, if I could just say out loud, as the district attorney of Suffolk County, we sued ICE. We successfully stopped ICE from entering courtrooms.
Yeah.
And civilly arresting people in the public places of courtrooms. We believe that in hospitals, schools, churches, and courtrooms, people should be able to tell the truth about what it is that's happening to them without the fear of being deported. I think we need to get people that are fluent in languages. In addition, you need to hear that if it's Suffolk County, we are looking at what the immigration consequences would be with respect to charges. And I am fully aware that that's complicated when it comes to domestic violence, because we have victims that need to be heard and we need people to be held accountable, but we also need to make sure that, is that accountability gonna result in something that ultimately is a death sentence for that person, sending them back to somewhere they haven't been? This isn't easy, right? Hard discussions, but we are at least starting to talk about it. But that community needs to know they're in Suffolk County. We're gonna be looking at immigration consequences and making sure that they're not cruel and unusual.
Thank you, District Attorney, and thank you for your great work, especially helping so many immigrants in our city. We greatly appreciate it.
I think just one, so Counselor Flynn and I actually went to go visit the Family Justice Center. We got to see not only where our children are being interviewed, hear more about the coordination, and the, the intentionality on making sure that children are not re-traumatized through the process. So we learned a lot in terms of best practices that could possibly transfer over to other types of cases. So I appreciate you guys sharing that. I think I'd like to sort of ask this one question, because I think we learned a lot from the previous panelists who went really deep and shared things that were absolutely surprising, frankly. From where you sit, I'd be curious to hear what is one thing, I mean, folks in this room may know, but what is one thing that people in the public should know about the work you do that might even surprise the folks in this room?
I would say that as far as the police, that we do look upon for our service providers to help us, so we do reach out to them a lot, to call, to ask them what we can provide. So I think for us, it's just having that network of folks that we can say, okay, we need someone to get housing, or we need someone to get mental health, and we have, at the FJC, we have that in-house. So that's one thing, like, we don't have to try to figure out where that is. We can go downstairs, we can make a phone call, or they can come upstairs, and we have that connection. Whenever we have cases involving kids, if they're cases that are not going to be prosecuted, we'll send those downstairs and they'll provide them with services and counseling. So I think that's one of the things that the FJC really does well, is having just all those partners and be able to have all those service providers there to assist us, to let them have that housing, because we can't as police provide housing. But as long as we have the connections that we can say, okay, let's call this agency or call this person, we can have them tell us what they have for housing or available bedding or counseling. We can provide that information to the victims and survivors.
So how do we expand that
I think that right now we have a limited amount of groups in the FJC, but I think if we can expound upon that and provide more service providers that can give us other things, more behavioral counseling, and like the DA said, there's a lot of more services that we need that we can provide, and I think right now at the FJC, we're limited because of the space that we have, but I believe that if we can get more space that we can provide and bring more services inside that we currently don't have.
Thank you. Okay, thanks.
I think what would surprise most folks would be just the sheer volume of referrals that we see. And as some of the prior panelists discussed, this child abuse in particular is not something that's easily or readily talked about by the community. And I think because as a community we're often silent on the needs of youth and that this is happening at such high rates, we're falling short of really identifying how many kids might benefit from help and services.
Anything else? Thank you, guys. Thank you. You want to share anything else, Captain? No. Sure? Okay. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Captain.
Thank you, guys. I'd like to now invite up, let's see, we have, if I can find my list, Stephanie, Lauren from Casa Marina, Lauren from Fenway Health. From the Health Commission, I think we're going to have Catherine. Catherine, you're going to testify from the Health Commission? Please. Thank you. Oh, perfect. Actually, I'll put it up here. And I quickly just want to read a letter from our colleague on the council who could not be here tonight, but submitted a letter given the importance of the hearing. It's from Councilor Nisa Asabi-George, who is one of the at-large councilors for the city of Boston. Please be advised that I will be absent from today's hearing on domestic violence and sexual assault due to a prior commitment. I would like to thank the chair, Council McCarthy, for hosting the hearing, and thanks to Councilors Flynn and Campbell for sponsoring this hearing. Despite my absence, I would like to offer my support for the survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. It is devastating to know that approximately 3/4 of the population in Massachusetts are survivors of domestic violence. We have so much more work to do in our city to support survivors and to tackle the root causes of sexual assault and domestic violence. I am grateful for the leadership of the sponsors of today's hearing, eager to learn about the next steps that we as a city can take to address these damaging and pervasive issues. I will review the recording of the hearing online. Councilor Anissa Asabi-George. Thank you. you could state your name for the record and start with your testimony. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Stephanie Brown. I'm the CEO of Casa Mirna. All right, so thanks for inviting us here this evening. Because we believe that every relationship should be safe and healthy, Casa Mirna works to end domestic and dating violence through intervention, prevention, and awareness. We were founded in 1977, and we now support about 1,800 survivors every year through our 3 shelter programs, our housing advocacy and assistance, financial literacy education, and job readiness skill building, counseling, legal advocacy and representation, children's services, and community-based advocacy. And we do our community-based advocacy through partnerships with local Boston health clinics, courts, schools, the Family Justice Center, who's getting a lot of shout-outs today. And we also operate SafeLink, which is Massachusetts' statewide domestic violence hotline. And that SafeLink advocates answer about 27,000 calls every year. And we also do tabling and community events and workshops. 60% of our staff identify as survivors, and over 60% of our staff is bilingual in English and Spanish, and another 10% speak other languages. We support all survivors, but our community is primarily Black and Latino women under the age of 30. 96% earn $30,000 a year or less, and 35% are immigrants who speak English as a second language. While in my role I don't work directly with survivors, my role is to ensure that Casa Mirna staff have resources, supports, and the partnerships they need to do their work with survivors and to bring awareness about domestic violence to our communities. In our experience, most survivors of domestic violence do not need services. They need support and access to resources. The foundation of Casa Mirna's work with survivors is of the need for economic stability and permanent housing. Imagine living in an abusive relationship and being forced to decide between remaining in that relationship and rendering yourself and your children homeless and hungry, or losing your children, losing custody of your children if you leave. No one should ever have to make a choice like that, and yet countless survivors make that choice every day. We know that 38% of survivors who leave an abusive relationship become homeless immediately after separating from their partner. Without safe, affordable, permanent housing, and the financial means to maintain that housing, survivors will continue to be at risk and being victims of abuse in their relationship. Financial independence and permanent housing are the crux of survivors' ability to get free from abuse and stay free from abuse. One of the things that you asked us is what would surprise folks. There's 3 things that I'll briefly talk about. But the first one is that while we are a domestic violence organization, we don't work with survivors only on domestic violence incidents. Before we talk about the abuse, we have to ensure that survivors are safe and that they're working towards resolving their basic needs of housing and financial independence first. One of the other things that folks are surprised about is that while one of the goals of this hearing is to discuss ways to make it easier for survivors to report incidents to the criminal justice system, most survivors don't want to engage with the criminal justice system. They just want the abuse to stop. Most of the survivors with whom we work don't trust the system to believe them, and they don't feel like the system has their back. Communities need to see repeatedly an intolerance to domestic violence from the criminal justice system. They need to see law enforcement speak out against abuse and work towards community change while prioritizing victim safety and holding offenders accountable. In addition to the dynamics of domestic violence, law enforcement must also understand the neurobiology of trauma and police bias against immigrants, people of color, and other marginalized communities. Many survivors do not want to report abuse because they fear it may trigger immigration and deportation proceedings, or they don't want their partners arrested because Black men are already disproportionately targeted by law enforcement, or they rely on the abuser's income for support for themselves and their children. And then the third thing that would surprise folks is that domestic violence isn't just physical. And Janina and the district attorney talked about it way better than I do, so I'm not even going to say anything. But it's really important that folks understand that domestic violence is not physical and that the other forms of abuse are just as or more harmful than physical abuse.
Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Lauren Carabas. I work for Fenway Health's Violence Recovery Program. I just want to thank the survivors who spoke today. Janina, your testimony was really powerful, and it's a privilege to have the microphone tonight, so I'll do my best to kind of speak to the LGBTQ folks that we work with. So I'm the assistant manager of Fenway Health's Violence Recovery Program. We specialize in working with LGBTQ survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. We're one of only 3 agencies in the country that provides free LGBT competent counseling for survivors. I want to give a big shout out to the network, LARED, that does that has shelter services and other services for LGBTQ survivors. In my position, I work with folks one-on-one in individual counseling and supervise our team of advocates. I think it's important to note that LGBTQ folks experience domestic violence at the same rates and sometimes higher than their cisgender and heterosexual counterparts. Of course, those rates increase with intersecting identities. So LGBTQ immigrants, right, we're speaking a lot about siloed identities, and a lot of people hold multiple identities, and LGBTQ survivors with disabilities. In speaking about the barriers that survivors face in accessing services and reporting abuse, I want to address that systemic oppression is perhaps one of the greatest barriers that survivors of all identities face. In many instances, the services designed to protect and support survivors, such as law enforcement, the justice system, the mental health and medical care systems, were established in a culture that has historically included homophobia and transphobia and other systemic discrimination. What this looks like day to day is that a transgender survivor may have fled their country of origin for being beaten by police. They may be arrested for doing survival sex work. They may be thrown in a jail cell with a gender they don't identify with. They might be turned away from a female-only shelter and be called the wrong name or gender by their healthcare provider. In this way, the systems that have been designed to support survivors continuously perpetuate the violence they have already experienced. I think somebody mentioned, it might have been someone on the survivor panel, the importance of having survivors at the center of this work, and I think that that's just another thing I want to lift up. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Lauren.
Good evening. My name is Catherine Fine. I'm the Director of the Division of Violence Prevention at the Boston Public Health Commission. I too want to really acknowledge a deep appreciation to the survivors who spoke today, who had the courage to come and share their stories. They were very powerful and really important for all of us to really center our work in your stories. Also, thank you to Councillor Campbell and Councillor Flynn for co-hosting and having us here. So we are the city's health department, so just to give a little sense of how we frame the work. Our goals are to use a public health approach to support organizations working with survivors to reduce domestic violence and sexual violence. And this includes both supporting intervention and prevention programming, applying a holistic view by supporting organizations that interact with survivors to increase their capacity to offer trauma-informed care. And we also prioritize a health equity approach, which is similar to a lot of what's been shared already, but also acknowledging the impact of multiple and interrelated forms of violence, including domestic violence, sexual assault, community gun violence, child abuse, and the structural racism and other forms of oppression. So one way that we do that is that we are the governing entity in part of the Family Justice Center, so I won't go into a lot of detail, but we really do support the operational sort of interrelatedness at the FJC, assuring the co-location of the 12 multidisciplinary partners there. And as others have testified to, this co-location really helps increase collaboration, coordination, and minimizes the number of times that survivors need to repeat their stories. So we're very proud to continue to be able to do that, and also appreciate hearing that there's always need for more space and need to have more access to different kinds of services in the building. So thank you for lifting that up. Another area that may be less known about the Family Justice Center and the work of the Boston Public Health Commission in coordinating that work is the kinds of trainings that happen in the building and that can happen because of that shared space. So in the current year, we've hosted trainings on topic areas including bystander intervention, immigration law, partner abuse in LGBTQ communities. And the Family Justice Center Commission staff has worked very closely with community partners to develop a 3-day training institute that really focuses on addressing safety and healing through cultural awareness. And this training really names the impact of structural racism and other forms of oppressions, and it deepens providers' capacity and tools to address those issues. We've trained 50 providers in that training this year, and this is a publicly available free training institute that's open to anybody who would like to participate. The Division of Violence Prevention also continues to deliver free trauma-informed care trainings, and we've provided training to about 6,000 providers since 2013. And these providers are providers who may not necessarily be survivor organizations, but they may be entities that are interacting with people who may have experienced violence. And so we want them to also be trauma-informed and sensitive to the impact. So this looks like youth workers, other agencies serving immigrant and refugee communities, our homeless service providers at the Boston Public Health Commission, and most recently we've expanded into working into a pediatric setting at Boston Medical Center. And so through these trainings, we found that 1/3 of providers report a client experiencing multiple forms of violence in the past year, including domestic violence, sexual violence, and children's exposure to violence, as well as community violence. However, what they're also reporting is that our systems, and this has been echoed already, often remain siloed by funding streams in terms of who they can or cannot serve and who is the right kind of victim, and this creates barriers to safety and healing for everyone. So we've done so we really do want to kind of lift up that gap in really understanding how kind of to work across different forms of violence and what the increased elevation of risk becomes for survivors when they have these multiple both experiences of violence in different settings and different forms of oppressions that are impacting their access to care or access to the systems that they need to take advantage of. And then finally, we just wanted to lift up this point that it is really critically important to support the staff that are working in all of these settings. We have partnered recently with the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Advancement to address vicarious trauma among immigrant refugee serving providers, as well as our own Bureau of Homeless Services, and we would like to kind of continue to deepen our capacity to do this work so that we can continue to offer this kind of training for free to providers across the city. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much to this panel. The last point on taking care of the staff and the providers who do this work is something that came up in our conversation with the various providers we met with months ago, and how important that is. It's often lost in conversation. There's very little funding, if any at all, that go towards that, because this is also traumatizing work. I mean, just after this hearing tonight, all of us should leave here taking some very deep breaths and making sure we're taking care of ourselves, right? But how do you do that professionally and consistently? So thank you for raising that up. I don't have any questions, but I'll turn it over to Councilor Flynn if he does.
Thank you, Council President, and thank you to the panelists that came by here and talking about needed programs on this important issue. As it relates to the LGBTQ community, what more can we do to make sure that people that are victims of domestic violence know where the services are? How do we how do we communicate that message to them? And is there also a stigma that they may have of coming forward and not coming forward to press charges or get the services that they need?
Thanks for your question, Counselor. I think that a lot of the answer has been said here already tonight about sort of on a macro level, including survivors in the conversation about how to provide services that are more responsive. I think I really appreciated what you were saying about the trainings. I think we need to have more service providers that are culturally competent in working with all communities, but definitely LGBTQ folks in order to feel safe to come forward. And I think that includes understanding the barriers of what it means to actually speak up and be believed. I think that one question that was asked of us earlier was about sort of collaboration amongst services, and I feel like that's because of the limited resources, we're all sort of really siloed. There's one agency that has shelter, there's one agency that does housing, there's one agency that has comprehensive mental health care, and I don't have the answer necessarily, but sort of just want to speak to the issue that we're all sort of working really hard at different things, and that's why. And I think if there was a way for us to be able to collaborate better, the services would feel more responsive to all communities.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. Thank you. I'm now going to do some public testimony for some folks who have signed up. I'm going to call a few people at once and just ask you to come up and join us, and we'll have each person go separately. I have, and I apologize, it looks like Patricia, it's difficult to read the penmanship. Probably signed up early on. Email is fenway858 or something like that @gmail.com. That's me, and I'm on my way. Patricia, would you like to take your time? I also have Shamika Gregory. Are you still here? And then Cynthia Brazier. What's your last name? White. Thank you for having this. No problem.
Hi, Patricia.
Cynthia.
It looks like we've lost Shamika. And then it looks like I have Mia and Osasu. Is this one name or two?
It's two names.
Oh, two.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll start with you, then we'll have you guys come up next. Okay, thank you, guys. So first, if you could take the mic. You can take that. Actually, no, try this one. And I just quickly ask that you state your name for the record, and you have a few minutes to do your testimony, and then we'll move on. We don't do questions and all of that. It's just an opportunity to share. Patricia, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening.
I want to first thank the city councilors for having this open session. I think it's wonderful. I'm a survivor, domestic violence survivor, and I want to say thank you to my sisters here for stepping forward and moving in this process. It took me 2 years to get through the court system on a domestic violence. With my husband, I was married. No longer. June 7th, my divorce was finalized. However, I still suffer financially, physically, emotionally. But I thank God that I have family and people that prayed for me and kept me in contact and supported me. I did not know about Northeastern's domestic violence program. I've tried other avenues to get into, community providers that the state and the city offers to individuals that were damaged by domestic violence. It's difficult. Unless you meet a certain criteria, you qualify. And as my sister said, she's invisible. I'm invisible too, because I owned a home. That means you have finances. Court system can't help you. Court system assigns you an advocate that's only there for 6 months, maybe, possibly. And you tell your story over and over and over again. And what do you get? More suffering, and excuse my anger. Please. But it is hell living this life as a victim. And it's not easy. Because when you go to the resources that's listed in the back of a brochure, are referred to a certain number or email address, you're referred to another one because you don't meet the criteria. And that's sad. That's why women end up in homeless shelters. That's why women end up being abused again and again and again and having no dignity. It's a sad situation, and we need to do better. Court system, centers, providers, just don't sit at your desk and request for a grant each year. It doesn't do you any good because you're going to have mental health all around you every day. You need to do more. You need to talk to the victims. I know the procedures are written, the guidelines, the manuals. You need to get away from those manuals and those procedures because it's not working. And I'm here tonight to say, yes, I'm a survivor because I chose to be a survivor. And I've been praying, and I thank God again for City Councilor Flynn and Campbell. And I want to move forward, and I pray to God that there is help for women out there that's not getting it like myself.
Okay, can everybody hear me? Yes, okay. Good evening. My name is Cynthia Brazier, and I first want to say thank you to all of you fine people for being here and listening to not only us providers, but also to the survivors that I represent as I sit up here. I want to say thank you to the city council members because this is, I think, the third time that we're interfacing. And I do love the fact that we have the opportunity to have these conversations. I hope that we get to do this a lot more. I hope that going forward it can be more of a discussion, not necessarily, I know we're short on time and whatnot, but being able to kind of have real dialogue amongst each other. So again, my name is Cynthia. I am here representing Casa Myrna. I am the Dorchester Community Engagement Coordinator. I specifically represent Black women survivors that are from that community. And I want to talk about the barriers that I run into as I'm supporting our survivors, including, I think Stephanie mentioned this earlier, that a lot of the times we don't get to focus on the healing from the trauma that they've experienced, whether that's the domestic violence that they experience, or the childhood trauma that they experience, or the trauma that their children have experienced. A lot of times we don't even get a chance to focus on that aspect of the work because of the basic needs that we constantly have to focus on, you know? And so in that, I try my best to provide the emotional support or just that, the shoulder rub or whatever it may be to kind of help them in that moment to kind of move forward or to encourage them to, keep pushing along their journey or what have you. In addition, I think another difficult aspect of our work is when we're helping those survivors who are fleeing from their situation. There just isn't enough resources to truly support someone who has finally worked up the courage to say enough is enough.
Yes.
They come to us and they want to either escape or they want another place to go. They want safety for themselves or their children, except they're met with so many barriers that it's nearly impossible. And it's hard for us as providers to sit across from our survivors who have really just overcome so much to then look at them and say, I'm sorry, I don't have an answer for you. I don't have a direction to point you towards. I don't have the resource that you're looking for. That's very difficult for me as a provider. For those that have relocated to our state, oh my God, the amount of barriers that they meet because they're not originally from Massachusetts. Are we kidding? Like, these women are needing our support. People are needing our support. And yet I have to abide by this manual that says that, oh, because you haven't lived in this state for such and such amount of time, you can't access this resource that you need to survive and to be good for your family, for your kids. That's a difficulty for me. Those who, let me see, oh my God, legal services for those who are fleeing from other states, or those who, fleeing from other states and are here with us now. Guys, I became a lawyer. I think someone mentioned earlier, what we do. My main role is meeting people where they're at. I'm not a legal professional. I don't have those skills or what have you, but I can't stand by and say I can't help you because it's not within my job description, or it's not within the bounds of my role. If I can help you in any way, shape, or form, then I have to do that. But then that's me taking on a brunt of work that is a lot more than I can manage, really. But who else is going to do it for them? Who else? We're talking about survivors telling their stories over and over and over again. I think one of the survivors mentioned earlier that, being able to have the courage to stand up and say, I need help. I don't think we realize how many times they have to stand up and say, I need help, from each of the services that they're trying to access. And that's unacceptable. In terms of advising survivors to reach out to their local police officials or justice systems, I would love to be able to continue to do that, and I do so, but it's met by, well, Cynthia, this is what has happened when I have tried to do it in the past. I've called to report a violation of a restraining order, but something as little as, did you catch the picture of the person that was following you, keeps that violation from being recorded. Okay? Or how about visitation at a police department, which, whatever, I'll leave that there. But, an abuser manipulating the system to then work against the survivor who's trying to abide by the regulations that they agreed upon. That's very difficult, Not to mention that a lot of the agencies, a lot of the providers that our survivors have to interface lack the skill of being trauma informed. Someone mentioned language earlier. That is very big. That trauma informed piece is so important. I've had survivors that are in shelters who are trying to make it to their jobs and back to the shelter at a certain time, who are being questioned and asked, oh, are you sure you're not with somebody else? Are you sure you didn't go see somebody else? Do you know what this woman has had to go through? That's not the question that she should be met with at the door when she's approaching her shelter. The other thing, in terms of working in the community, and I guess in the sense of what support we need a lot more providers. We need a lot more clinical level providers that can really do the work that needs to be done. Because if it is that I'm just so happening to provide some sort of emotional support, then it needs to be that I know exactly what I'm doing. It needs to be that I understand vicarious trauma, that I have the support from my agency to really take care of myself in addition to the survivors that I'm supporting. And then just to mention a couple of things that have been said, immigration status, that's a very big thing that plays a role in the services and the resources that survivors access. I've had survivors who refuse housing because they're so afraid of this new policy around the whole public, yeah. Mm-hmm. Are you kidding? This mom is choosing to be in a shelter with her child who was raped because she's so afraid of being deported. And she needs it. I need more support around those survivors who are not choosing to leave. I think a lot of times the assumption is that survivors are ready to leave, or that they have to leave their situation. That might not be feasible for them, especially when we don't have shelters to provide them, especially when we don't have the financial resources to help support them. So how do we support our survivors if they're choosing to stay? How do we help to keep them safe? How do we have those conversations with them? And services for children. I really do think that we meet a lot of barriers there. Sometimes it's because of long wait lists. Sometimes it's because they're a certain age, which none of that should matter, because if they're in the home and they're witnessing that, they need the support. And if we're trying to break this cycle of domestic violence, then we can't just look at one aspect of the family and not focus on the whole. So, thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you. Thank you. At this time, I would like to invite up Mia and Osasu. And then I have Katia Santiago-Taylor. Are you still here? And I'll let each person go for a couple of minutes or a few minutes. And okay. Please state your name for the record. Jump right in.
Hi, my name is Mia Prince. I'm a peer leader at Casa Mirna.
Oh, you can jump right in, and then we'll go one by one. Oh, great. Go right ahead. Do your thing.
Hello.
Hold that mic over there. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Osasu Wagrin. I've been a peer leader at Casa Mirna for the past 5 months, and I'm a sophomore at Boston Latin Academy.
Once again, hello, my name is Mia Prince. I'm a sophomore at the John G. O'Brien School of Mathematics and Science. Currently, I am the director of the Public Peace Committee on the Mayor's Youth Council. As a peer leader in Casa Mirna, we focus on the education and prevention process and aspect of our mission. Through a partnership with the Boston Public Health Commission's program, Start Strong, we aim to give workshops to our peers and teach them about teen dating violence and unhealthy relationships. Besides teaching people what an unhealthy relationship is, we also provide the tools to have a healthy relationship where boundaries, consent, and communication are in the forefront.
Other things we do to reach our community are table links and community events, where we give information about our agency to anybody interested. We also host community events for youth so they know that Casa Mirna is a resource. We handle the Instagram to reach possible survivors through a different platform. Before working at Casa Mirna, I didn't know how to spot unhealthy or abusive relationships. Now I'm able to notice red flags, refer people to appropriate resources, and know safe spaces where a young person can get support if they're in an abusive relationship.
It is important for us to be doing this work because according to a survey done by the CDC, 1 in 11 high school age females and 1 in 15 high school age males have reported experiencing physical abuse in their relationship in the past year. In an average Boston Public School classroom, there would be roughly 3 girls and 2 males in this type of relationship. Even though our mission is to make sure every relationship is healthy, we honestly aren't there yet. We believe that having staff such as guidance counselors and teachers be trained on how to respond to disclosures will be beneficial while we work on educating teens in the Boston Public School system on healthy relationships. I think the biggest way in which we can make an impact and stop domestic violence starts with young people. Teaching young people on how to Teaching young people on how to have a healthy relationship. It is important to stop these actions and behaviors before they become normalized at a young age and then carried on into adult years. Most of us get our examples of a relationship from the media, whether it be shows, movies, or songs, and oftentimes the media doesn't portray this in a good or right light.
Okay. The way in which we are trying to reduce domestic violence is by teaching the alternative, ways in which we have a healthy relationship. While the school system teaches us about health and wellness, I learned very valuable lessons as a peer leader on ways of having a healthy relationship, not only romantically, but with friends and family.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Okay, that was powerful, uplifting, and a whole bunch of things. Thank you guys so much, and thank you for actually coming to testify to offer that perspective, which is so critical to the conversation. So thank you both so much.
I'm not sure if I want to follow. I'm going to start with, as a parent, yes, as a parent of school-age children that lives in the suburbs, I wish you were, like, I want to pocket you and bring you to me, bring you to my children, because this is all I want my kids to be. Also, BARC, this is not my written documents, BARC is leading the Healthy Use Coalition, which is the coalition that is trying to pass the Healthy Use Act statewide. So BPD, Boston Public Schools in Boston, has done an amazing job to bring this to the schools, but that is not the reality statewide. So if you're not part of Boston Public School, I encourage you to reach out, because what our children are getting outside Boston Public School is none of that. None of that. It's almost November, and I have asked for the curriculum 3 times in my school, and they won't give it to me. So, anyways, my name is Katia Santiago Taylor, and I am here as a representative of the Boston Area Rape Crisis Center. I am their Advocacy and Legislative Affairs Manager. And I wanted to give you a testimony on when it comes with regards to sexual violence. Many of you know that BARC has been providing rape crisis centers services in Boston area for the last 46 years. Not only are we the only rape crisis center in Boston, but we're also the largest in Massachusetts. Our mission is to end sexual violence through healing and social change. BARC's medical advocacy program supports survivors in 19 hospitals, the emergency room, including the 7 Saints sites, and 9 hospitals in Boston. During 2018, we supported more than 410 survivors at the emergency room who had an evidence collection kit performed. That is more than 1 a day. During the same time frame, our legal advocacy program held over 1,300 sessions supporting survivors. Additionally, the multidisciplinary statewide access to forensic information program, which is one of a kind, has provided critical forensic information to survivors over the last 15 years. As the Rape Crisis Center that supports the most survivors in the emergency room and has the most comprehensive legal advocacy program, we fully understand the prevalence of sexual violence and the importance of trauma-informed investigations and prosecutions to best support survivors. We believe that the criminal legal system is not currently working for survivors of sexual violence. Statistics show that sexual violence and rape are the most underreported and under-prosecuted violent crimes. National statistics show that under 6% of rapes end in an arrest, and 0.6% end in incarceration. 0.6%. As a rape crisis center, we also understand that prosecution is not the answer for all sexual assaults. It is for some, but not all. That said, focusing on prevention is critical moving forward. Prevention should not outline what survivors can or should do, but should zero in on the perpetrator's behavior and holding them accountable, as well as shifting community norms. Prevention efforts should start at an early age when teaching children about healthy relationships and consent. We should give youth the tools to speak up and become active bystanders. We should provide survivors services and hold perpetrators accountable for their crimes. In order to best prevent sexual violence, we need to believe and validate survivors and change the culture that enables sexual violence to happen. Thank you so much for the time and for all the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just being mindful of time, because this is, again, not City Hall, not our space, I'm going to just quickly go through public testimony. I have one more person signed up, J.B. Delgado. Oh, come on down. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you for everybody's patience. Thank you.
If you could state your name for the record and
Yes.
jump right in. Thank you for being here so much.
Of course. Thank you. My name is JP Delgado Galdames. I am the Community Engagement Associate at the Network Lared. The Network LaRed is a 30-year-old survivor-led Boston-based organization working statewide to end domestic violence within LGBTQ, polyamorous, and SM communities through services and community education. In our work, we see many survivors from our communities unable to establish stable housing for years at a time. Our advocacy efforts to find housing for survivors, even short-term shelter, constantly comes up against policies that do not accept LGBTQ people and practices that don't accept LGBTQ people. And when we do find domestic violence shelter space for LGBTQ survivors, the services are often incomplete or not competent. Many times, providers and police are unable to identify who is being abusive and who is a survivor within LGBTQ, polyamorous, and SM relationships where abuse is happening. Many survivors are forced to choose between safety and being out about who they are and what they have experienced. In 2018, the Network LaRed received 39 requests from survivors looking for a shelter or for housing, yet we were only able to house 13 people in our transitional living program. We believe this number is lower than the actual need for housing, as most data in this field is usually underreported. Considering the painful history that LGBTQ communities have with police, LGBTQ survivors are less likely to reach out to law enforcement. The recent mishandling of the Straight Pride Parade, quote, by the City of Boston and Boston Police, the mistreatment of counter-protesters, and the violence towards homeless folks by Boston Police during Operation Clean Sweep show patterns in police action that validate the deep mistrust from LGBTQ survivors and homeless communities towards law enforcement. Patterns of police violence and brutality against Black and brown people, people with disabilities, LGBTQ people, and homeless communities that go unchecked and remain without consequences inform people who abuse that it is okay to abuse, and that their abuse, there won't be any consequences for it. This means that survivors of domestic violence, especially those who are or have experienced homelessness, are less likely to reach out to Boston Police when they are at risk. This is a crisis that needs to be addressed in many ways. For example, by increasing the number of subsidized and affordable housing units in Boston, by making LGBTQ domestic violence training and screening training ongoing and mandatory for all shelters and police, and by reenacting rent control legislation. Finally, as a member of the LGBTQIA Domestic and Sexual Violence Coalition, I encourage providers to prioritize their LGBTQ staff needs. We cannot serve LGBTQ survivors while we neglect our LGBTQ staff, many whom are survivors themselves. Thank you.
Thank you so much. At this time, I'm going to give the mic to Councilor Flynn for some closing remarks.
Thank you, Council President, and I want to thank the panelists for being here, for those that testified, for sharing your stories, your recommendations on how we can work together on this critical issue. I especially want to say thank you to Margot and the team at Northeastern University Domestic Violence Program for educating myself and the Council President on this important issue, and we hope that we're able to continue working with you, Margot, and with Northeastern University. I wanted to get involved in this issue and work on this issue, as the Council President mentioned, because it is a major problem in my district. As I stated at the introduction comments, representing a large immigrant community, a large undocumented community, large public housing area, in an LGBT community. I hear about stories frequently, and what I really learned about this issue is I served 10 years as a probation officer at Suffolk Superior Court prior to this, and worked on this issue, on domestic violence issues, and worked closely with the district attorney's office. But immigrants coming forward, you know, there was really no system in place for them, especially for the woman survivor. There was always a difficulty, language issues, there was difficulty with housing issues, and so what would happen most of the time is the case would not go forward because of whether it's a cultural issue, a language issue, financial issue. So I wanted to at least focus on that issue on the Boston City Council is how can we make sure that our immigrant voice is heard in the city. And I do want to say thank you to the Family Justice Center as well and their dedicated team of working on this important issue. And I also want to say thank you to the council president as well, but it's really something that will never be done with, and we'll continue working on this issue because there's so much to learn and there's so much resources that are needed, and there's a important role for advocacy for the city council to play, especially as it relates to funding. And one of the major goals, one of the major priorities of the Boston City Council is advocating for programs during the budget process. And that's something I'm going to work hard on. I know the City Council President will do the same, but we want to make sure that your voice is heard, especially during the budget process as well. And we could hopefully advocate for you to make sure that there are programs available to survivors, but also maybe even connecting that into working closely with the Boston Public School System, as these young students mentioned earlier, you know, educating, especially our young boys, and giving them an opportunity to learn about a good relationship so that when they grow up, they can be a productive father, they can be a productive member of society as well. So again, I just want to say thank you to everybody for being here tonight, and I learned a lot, and it's something myself and the council president will continue to work on. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn, for the partnership. And frankly, I think it's a powerful statement that we sit here, and I don't speak in code, as a white man and a black woman partnering on these issues. I think it is critical, I think it is important, and we recognize the statement is very powerful. And so we'll continue to partner on these issues. I want to thank Margot Northeastern for hosting us. I know we have to get out of here, but to open up your space was really critical. One of the things that was important to us was getting and moving the conversation out of City Hall, getting outside of the confines of where we traditionally like to stay and where we're comfortable, and trying to make it a little bit more convenient for folks to show up, to participate, to even take the T, to walk here, whatever. So thank you for providing the space. We'll continue to move outside, and what we mean by that is to bring in those folks who think this issue isn't about them. And that is very important. We heard that loud and clear. I also want to thank all of the providers who testified. We understand this is not easy work. It is complicated, whether it's Boston Police Department, our Health Commission, District Attorney Rollins, Ian and her incredible team, all of the community-based providers. It's easy to point fingers when things go wrong, but we're not there on the ground every single day, taking the calls, having to file the reports. So thank you for what you do every day. And thank you for being very candid and honest about how you can do better, how we can do better. Really appreciated that as well. I also want to thank, of course, the organizations that weren't testifying today, but were still in the room. Jane Doe was here. Our hearing order cites data points from that incredible organization, and we want to acknowledge that. We could have had, frankly, a long list of providers. There were folks on the ground doing work in my district, working with the Haitian community, working with the Cape Verdean community, Portuguese community, Latino community, Latinx community, Asian community. A lot of incredible work happening on the ground. We want to also acknowledge those folks who, although they didn't testify, are still just as important as the providers that testified today. We also want, of course, thank our survivors, not only for coming and testifying, but for staying, for sticking around, for listening. It could have been very painful for you to hear some of the things coming out of the providers and wanting to chime in, but you stayed to listen and be a part of the conversation. So thank you to all of you for being here and for your courage. Really appreciate it. And know that it is an inspiration for both of us to continue the work, the uncomfortable conversations about all three categories that are very rich and complex. You provide inspiration to us by just being here, and it was above and beyond to hear from you in terms of your experience, but particularly how you define justice. We have a lot of work to get to that definition and your definition of what justice means, but it's powerful to have a working definition that is coming from you guys versus from us. So thank you again. And this was an opportunity also for us to make sure that we did more listening and less speaking, to ensure that those who come forward and are dealing with this every single day, that they are not invisible. We heard that quite a bit. No one in the city of Boston, in this country, frankly, or the world, but really in the city of Boston should ever feel invisible. And that was really devastating to hear and shocking to hear. But then at the same time, it sort of added a little bit of, gave me a little oomph, I guess, to say we have much more work to do, particularly from the government space, to ensure that folks don't feel invisible, folks who are our neighbors, folks who live in our community. So thank you to those folks who offered public testimony, who named that, but then gave us an opportunity to come forth with solutions so that they don't feel invisible. And lastly, in terms of where do we go from here, we heard loud and clear that we want this to be a dialogue. We do too. Because of the formal hearing nature of our hearings, we had to start like this. Not frankly ideal for us. We had to record it like this, we had to set it up like this, all of that. So we chose this opportunity just to gather as much information as possible. We have to go back and review this, look at it. Everyone is doing incredible work in their own right. How do we sort of synthesize all of that and put forth thoughts and ideas around where the conversation goes from here? There will be subsequent conversations that will not be set up like this. We had to start this way, but the next time we can actually do it in a more creative, innovative way that involves a round table and actual discussion on, now that we know this information, where do we go from here? How do we stop working in silos? How do we work in partnership, in collaboration? How do we hold each other accountable? And how do we absolutely always have survivors at the center of every conversation that we host? If we learned anything, going forward, every conversation should include survivors at the table. And frankly, to agencies and state agencies, community-based organizations, if we are having or contemplating what we are doing in policies or regulations, we already know that based on public testimony and those who agreed to come forward, they're willing participants to be at the table, even informally, without paying them. That's a beautiful thing. So we will make sure that every conversation we have going forward includes survivors at the table as we contemplate what we should be doing. And so we will be in touch with the folks who are here. We hope that you signed up so that we can stay engaged with you, and we hope you did so legibly. We also hope that you will stay engaged with us. We will be following up with a few folks in the room who shared some thoughts that may guide how we design what next steps could be, and that, of course, includes the survivors, and we will start with you, so we hope you remain available to us. And so we will be in touch in terms of next conversations. I'm expected to have my second child at the end of this year. I'm saying this publicly, at the end of this year or early January. So if I'm MIA for a little bit, that is why. It does not mean that this conversation is not important, or that the sense of urgency that we have established, particularly in this conversation, that it doesn't exist anymore. It does. So I'm just putting that out there. And I'll end by saying you know, this is heavy stuff. And I don't know about many folks in the room, but it triggered a lot for me personally, for me professionally, for me in thinking about my family, for me thinking about experience with some of these issues. And so let's make sure that we're taking care of ourselves. What does it mean for, and this I guess goes to providers too, as we are tasked with doing the work, as my uncle often likes to tell us, it's okay not to be okay. And to name that, and to feel emotions, and to express them. So if you have tears, cry. You know, if you feel vulnerable, and however that, be that. But to hide our emotions, to show up inauthentically is a total mistake. We are all human beings. And if you were not triggered today, well, I want to check on you and make sure you're not a robot. And so make sure you're taking care of yourselves. And again, if we can be a resource with respect, or the providers in the room can be a resource with respect to folks who felt triggered, we're here, use us. And thank you, last but definitely not least, to my team, to Counselor Flynn's team, to make this happen. It does not happen by accident. There were a lot of emails exchanged with people. And to central staff, thank you guys for set up the mics. Carrie, who's taping this for the public to watch. Candace, thank you. Shane, thank you. And to our incredible staff, we appreciate you guys. Thank you very much. We can give them a round of applause. Thank you. And this hearing is adjourned. Have a lovely evening.
Good job. That was very informative. Yeah.